Okay, so welcome everybody. We're here to do an hour briefing on understanding adolescent neglect today. And this is being arranged through the Safeguarding Children Partnership. And it's obviously a multi-agency briefing. So just to introduce myself, first of all, my name is Vicky Leader. For those that don't know me, I am the Early Help and Prevention Service Manager with Herefordshire Council. So a bit of background, I have been a qualified social worker in Hereford since 2010, worked in a variety of different teams over the years, have been a team manager in the looked after children's service, as well as a team manager across the child protection and court teams. I've been more latterly in my service manager role in early help for 3 years. And in addition to that, I'm one of the trainers that delivers the Understanding Childhood Neglect training, which is also part of the partnership. And I'll just introduce Amy Tootle, who can talk a little bit about herself, who's also training with me today.
Good morning, everybody. As Vicky said, I'm Amy Tootle. I'm a specialist nurse advisor for safeguarding children at Wye Valley NHS Trust. Again, a bit of background about myself. I've been part of the children's safeguarding team for nearly 8 years now. I think in February next year, I will have been a qualified nurse for 28 years, which feels an incredibly long time. I'm also a health visitor by background, and prior to that was a learning disability nurse. So I've worked with young people of all ages throughout my career. I'm also one of the graded care profile 2 trainers for the partnership, and have been since the tool was adopted back in, I think it's about 2017. So welcome to today's training.
Thanks, Amy. So this is just to reiterate what I said at the start. I know people are joining since I went through the beginning introduction. So just really important for everybody to look after themselves today and each other. The content of this morning's briefing can be quite triggering. It's an emotional subject with sensitive content at times. So please don't forget to reach out for support from your manager, from your colleagues, but also there are links in the chat if you need that external support. It's fine to take a break if you need to. Please turn your camera off if you need to as well. This is only an hour briefing, and obviously we've got a lot to get through, so questions will be covered at the end. We have got time for that. Okay. So in terms of our learning outcomes for today, the outcome that we want to achieve is for you to have an introduction to child and adolescent neglect. Obviously, you're a multi-agency group of professionals with a range of different experiences yourselves, but today's focus is predominantly going to be on adolescents neglect. If you are interested in a more detailed overview of neglect across childhood, I'd certainly recommend you attend the other training, Understanding Childhood Neglect, which is a whole morning. It's much more interactive, and the link is in the PowerPoint, which will be shared with you. So considering neglect in adolescence and how it may present differently will also be covered as an outcome. We'll include the different types of neglect and link that into the age range of adolescents. We're hoping that you will feel more confidence in how to discuss, identify and also address issues around neglect, as well as having some increased awareness of tools, resources and the support that's available to you all when working with children and families. And just to say that the links to these tools and resources and also support will be available in the slides which are sent after, and the links will be embedded, so you'll have access to those. So to start with, just to highlight the reason for today's briefing. So there was a multi-agency child neglect audit, which was completed in April of this year. So within this multi-agency audit, 12 children were audited from a range of child in need families. There were children subject to child protection plans. There was mixed kind of genders, age range, ethnicity and backgrounds. So a good range of different children were looked at. And it was looking at recent practice from September 24 up until February of this year. And the findings of those audits were that eight of the audits came out as good overall, but four ended in requires improvement and identified some areas for practice improvement. And one of the main areas of practice development, which is why we're here today, is that the period of adolescence was found to be an area for practice development. So a couple of key points from the findings were that multi-agency practice with younger children was assertive, timely, and coordinated. However, in terms of practice development, the finding was that practitioners struggled to be effective in addressing and sustaining change when neglect was chronic, particularly with older children, which is why we're considering adolescents today. And also another finding related to today's briefing is that Graded Care Profile 2, which is our evidence-based tool for assessing neglect, was not being consistently used. And in the examples where it was used, it wasn't completed with multi-agency input, which then secures a comprehensive understanding of needs and risks. So I will be handing over to Amy a little bit later, and she will be going through the graded care profile with you briefly and applying it to the period of adolescence. So to start with, this is just the generic definition of child neglect, which comes from Working Together in the 2023 update. So it highlights that child neglect is the persistent failure, so emphasising persistent, to meet a child's basic physical and or psychological needs, which is likely to result in the serious impairment of the child's health or development. And it also highlights that neglect can occur during pregnancy as a result of maternal substance abuse. So just to flag that neglect is a form of abuse, it does lead and can lead to long-term developmental issues. I'm sure you may have come across the reference to cumulative harm, and there is a slide on that a little bit later. So in terms of neglect, we're talking about that build-up of harm. So in kind of when you're thinking of a crisis being caused by a single event, that might be, you might be more thinking about physical abuse, but with neglect, it's that build-up of harm over a period of time. And within that, it's really important to collate and analyse those small events, put them all together and really think about what's happening for that child in that situation. And it just really emphasises the importance and use of chronologies to pull all of that together. So this just continues in terms of the definition. So once a child is born, neglect may involve a parent or carer failing to provide adequate food, clothing and shelter, which can include exclusion from home and abandonment. It's also failing to protect a child from physical and emotional harm or danger, failing to ensure adequate supervision. And obviously there are different age and stages to consider as part of that, and also ensuring access, so failing to ensure access to appropriate medical care or treatment. It may also include neglect of or unresponsiveness to a child's basic needs. So that's the general overview of child neglect. We're going to move on now, and I'm going to stop sharing so that Kirsty hopefully will be able to share a video with you, which is, in my view, it's a really powerful video. It's been put together by a group of young people in Solihull with support from youth and support workers and also the Solihull Safeguarding Partnership. So they've written, recorded and also filmed a video to raise awareness of neglect in young people. So I'm going to hand over to Kirsty in the video now.
Scattered on the floor, a shattered heart can't like a battle I can't win. Trying to amend, but where do I begin? I thought we had something real, but now it's just the pain that I feel. Promises made, now just empty words, leaving me with a heart that hurts.
It's hopeless. It's hopeless. Broken, shattered, and torn apart. Trying to find the strength to restart. Wishing for a look that won't fade away. But all I got's a broken heart today. Broken, shattered, and buried in the dirt. All I feel is just pain and hurt. Wishing for a look that won't fade away. But all I got's a broken heart today.
I've tried to move on, but it's not that easy. Every memory makes me feel empty. Pick up the pieces and try to heal. Right now, broken is all I feel. I try to make the signs as clear as I can. Sometimes dream that I really ran away from my problems and issues. I dream of the old you and I really miss you.
It's hopeless. It's hopeless. Broken, shattered, and torn apart. Trying to find the strength to restart. Wishing for a look that won't fade away. But all I got's a broken heart today. Broken, shattered, and buried in the dirt. All I feel is just pain and hurt. Wishing for a look that won't fade away. But all I got's a broken heart today.
Neglect is present in approximately 60% of cases when a child is seriously harmed or killed because of abuse or neglect. Young people who are neglected are more likely to be overlooked than very young children, who are more likely to be the subject of a child protection plan in England because of neglect. Around 1 in 10 children in the UK have been neglected. Young people who have been neglected must be understood as having experienced trauma.
All I've got's a broken heart today.
Thanks, Kirsty. I'm just going to reshare the slides. Okay, hopefully everybody can still see those. Yeah, brilliant. So yes, a very impactful video that you'll certainly have the link to in the slides is available online. Just a very important topic subject area, and hopefully you'll find the rest of the training helpful as well. So just thinking about moving on to adolescence now and the World Health Organization definition. So it's the phase of life between childhood and adulthood from ages 10 to 19. It's a unique stage of human development, an important time for laying the foundations of good health. So just to say that ages can vary from what people consider to be adolescence, but this 10 to 19 bracket is the most common definition. Some recent research suggests extending to 24 due to some of the societal changes that we're having, such as prolonging education, delayed marriage and parenthood, and also continued biological development. But for the purposes of today, we're focusing on the 10 to 19 age range. So adolescents experience rapid physical, cognitive, and psychosocial growth, which affects how they think, feel, make decisions, and interact with the world around them. I know when I'm handing over to Amy in a little while, there is a lot more information about this, but just to say for now, in terms of physical growth, that's characterized by puberty commencing, but again, we know that it can commence early, and with that comes considerable growth. There's the development of secondary sexual characteristics and the onset of menstruation in females. In terms of cognitive growth, it's characterized where thinking evolves from concrete black and white reasoning to greater capacity for abstract thought and long-term planning and impulse control. So there's significant development in the brain during adolescence. And then in terms of psychosocial growth, it's characterized by the need to explore identity, the strive for independence, developing that moral compass, and beginning to form more stable and also intimate relationships. So lots going on during this age range. And in terms of the United Nations Rights of the Child, they define adolescence as a life stage characterized by growing opportunities, capacities, aspirations, energy and creativity, but also significant vulnerability. So when we think of adolescence neglect and kind of where it differs from the generic definition of neglect, it's thinking about, so when you're thinking about childhood neglect, it's usually thinking about an act of omission. So where a parent or carer fails to do something, but actually with adolescent neglect, it could be an act of commission. So a deliberate act where young people may be abandoned by parents or forced to leave the home. It's also about not being aware of a child's activities outside the home, which we know can lead to kind of more risk-taking behaviours, not making sure that they get the healthcare when they need it, not taking interest in their education, and also failing to provide emotional support with problems or offering encouragement. So in terms, there is a link on this slide, which is about a report, some research that was conducted by the Children's Society in 2016, referred to as Troubled Teens. So they conducted a study of 1,000 students in year 10. It was an online study, and respondents were therefore self-reporting and all attended mainstream schools. So just to say, it's not a fully representative sample, but it did highlight some stark findings. So the study revealed that 1 in 7 14 to 15-year-olds lived with adult caregivers who neglected them in one or more ways. So that's 15% of the sample felt that they were being neglected by their caregivers. And that may be through being shown little or no interest, not being offered warmth or encouragement, and making no effort to monitor or protect them in terms of their health. So neglected young people reported low well-being and a higher propensity than their peers to behave in ways which may jeopardise their health or their prospects. So, for example, undertaking risk-taking behaviours. So just to say that neglect rarely just starts in adolescence. However, there will be families where a previously well cared for young person suddenly begins to be neglected. For example, parent failing to adapt to the different needs of the young person as they grow, as they become more autonomous. There may also be life events that prevent a parent or carer from being able to provide for the young person. But more likely than not, the neglected adolescent has been neglected for some considerable time, perhaps even going back to the prenatal period, and that this neglect has either not been previously recognised or not addressed. I'm sure you're all familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's a pyramid model of human needs, starting at the bottom with the basic needs and working the way up to the top of the triangle to achieve self-actualization. So it's hierarchical, as I've said. You cannot achieve the needs higher up the pyramid until you've had the needs at the bottom met. So really important to consider when you're working with children and families, and thinking about kind of the impact of children in those situations experiencing neglect. So that's just an interesting model, useful model to look at. So I'm going to take you through the different types of neglect and how they relate to the period of adolescence. So physical neglect is when a parent or carer is failing to take care of their child's basic needs, which includes providing shelter, food, clothing, and also keeping the child clean and hygienic. You'll recognise hopefully some of those images from the video, just showing a young person that's clearly being neglected, parents asleep, obviously drinking wine, and obviously home conditions are a concern and limited food in the fridge. Also on the right-hand side, there's the clutter image rating scale. I'm not sure if you've all seen that before. It does form part of our neglect screening tool, and the link will be provided for that. It is used to evaluate hoarding behaviour, but also we use it to consider home conditions where physical neglect may be a concern. And anything kind of 4 and above is identified to be a concern. So thinking about physical neglect in adolescence, although some adolescents may develop a tolerance to living in these kind of conditions, many of those adolescents will recognise that they are different from their peers, and they will kind of continue, as they've probably done throughout their childhood, to stop their friends coming around to their homes because they're embarrassed about the conditions. So that then has an impact on their ongoing friendships. In terms of kind of clothing and appearance, social development is likely to be impaired. We know that designer labels may be beyond the financial reach of many neglected adolescents, as well as many children, actually. But this alone won't make them stand out. But we know that clothing that is ill-fitting or dirty, it will affect their social development and presentation. So thinking about adolescence and that age range, you'd think that, yes, you know, children of that age range may be capable of doing their own washing, but that presupposes the idea that they've got a washing machine and laundry facilities available to them, and also the recognition that that's really important, both of which are often missing in the neglectful household. The same applies to hygiene. So we know during adolescence that the body is producing more sweat, and body odour can be an obvious threat to social development. Additionally, the skin and scalp can produce more oil, which results in greasy hair and skin. So hygiene is even more important in that period. Okay. So moving on to educational neglect in adolescence. So generally, education neglect is more than poor school attendance or not supporting a school's education. It includes a carer who doesn't provide a stimulating home environment, which is allowing the child to achieve their cognitive potential. So thinking about the adolescent period, those inequalities in educational and psychological resources will continue. They're unlikely to reduce in the adolescence period. So thinking about parental apathy towards and that disinterest in the young person's education, that is really unlikely to change. And therefore, there'll be little or no encouragement to address the problems which that neglectful history have created. The neglected adolescent is also likely to be experiencing or may be experiencing a cognitive impairment, which may then impact on their problem-solving capacity and also cause difficulties in them managing emotions. I'm sure many of you will have come across this, but this in school settings, this can lead to frustration and also a low anger threshold, which can lead to those challenging behaviours. So it's just trying to work out what the behaviours are showing us within those settings. Low confidence and repeated academic failure may confirm to the adolescents that their negative self-image is justified, and this can then consolidate their low self-expectations and aspirations. And the impact on the learning process, we know that young people might not be attending school, might be attending school late. The impact on their learning is obviously going to be exacerbated in that situation. And then thinking about their future, you know, in terms of being destined for unemployment or insecure and unrewarding minimum wage jobs, the impact of neglect will potentially be felt by these young people in terms of impoverishment, poor mental health, and poor social circumstances. So really quite significant for them. Okay, so in terms of emotional neglect in adolescence, so emotional neglect involves a carer being unresponsive to a child's basic emotional needs, including failing to interact or provide affection and failing to develop a child's self-esteem and sense of identity. So thinking about the period of adolescence, the life stages and transitions bring into play dimensions linked to identity formation, trying to achieve greater independence from carers, peer group involvement, and also developing autonomy. So a real critical stage. This in itself can sometimes cloud us being able to identify the impact of neglect in this particular age group. So it's sometimes really difficult to differentiate the natural changes that happen in this age range in relationships, which are part of the maturation process, from those that are associated with neglect. So, for example, some neglected adolescents can present as being emotionally independent from their parents. So it's just really important to try and consider that when you're supporting adolescents. It's natural that adolescents seek out opportunities to try to assert their independence, but when this is treated by the parents as the cue to emotionally abandon them, then this obviously constitutes neglect. Relationships between adolescents and their caregivers are often characterized as stormy. I'm sure you will have come across this. And even for some of the best intentioned parents who are literally trying to survive their child's adolescence in good humour, and they want their relationship to recover and eventually reform into a new and different state. So it's a difficult stage to go through. And it's even more difficult when that dynamic between the adolescents and caregiver is built on that unstable foundation of a neglectful relationship. The tensions are likely to come to the fore in that situation. And we know that conflict is very likely to happen, which is obviously really difficult. In terms of emotional neglect, it is we do see some of the worst outcomes being associated here. It's often a hidden form of harm, and it's harder to detect than other forms of neglect. And it's also difficult to measure, okay? But it does have the biggest impact because it's disrupting a child's development of their sense of self and also ability to form relationships, which we know can lead to a higher risk of mental and physical health issues, lower self-esteem, and also difficulty forming those healthy relationships. I'm going to hand over to Amy now, who's going to start covering medical neglect. Thanks, Amy.
Thanks, Vicky. Okay, so the definition of medical neglect is where a child isn't given or provided with their proper health care, and this can include dental care or refusing or ignoring medical and health recommendations. In adolescence, growing up in an environment of neglect will almost certainly be suffering with poorer health outcomes than their peers. Graham and Power in 2004 showed how poor start in life affects health throughout the childhood, as social circumstances subsequently reinforce and compound the disadvantages of the early years. Poor self-esteem and recklessness towards one's own health needs can also typify the neglected adolescent. They may be ignoring or enduring health problems rather than access the services which are available to assist, as they may see them as irrelevant or unnecessary without the right oversight and support of their parents or caregivers. Medical neglect in adolescence may involve a choice not to take up medical treatment, but it's more likely to involve a failure to access or accept health advice and an increased likelihood of risk-taking behaviours around their health needs. And again, this is impounded by parents not supporting or educating their young person. Preventative healthcare interventions continue to be important throughout childhood, and in adolescence, for example, there's the HPV vaccine, which prevents against cervical cancer and genital warts. The vaccine's administered during the adolescent period, and there is also the IPV vaccine that's administered to all young people between the ages of 13 and 18 to complete their protection against tetanus, diphtheria, and polio. And non-compliance with this protective regime can therefore carry significant future health risks. So when we're considering medical neglect with the teenager, we need to consider that this is a young person who is developing their independence, who is needing to understand their sense of self, and that includes their health needs. And it requires their parents to provide supervision around any medication that they're prescribed to ensure that they're taking that and understand the reason for them taking it and the impact of them not being compliant with their health needs. Sometimes we see unrealistic expectations of parents where they presume because a young person is now an adolescent, they should now have full responsibility for their health need. And if they're not being supervised, that can lead to neglect of that. It might also involve a parent not supporting the young person to attend their health appointments, to have their health needs reviewed and further assessments taken. But also not supporting the young person to seek support with physical and emotional health needs that are emerging during that period of time. Next slide, please, Vicky. Within Herefordshire, we recently had a child safeguarding practice review, which is referred to Child HN. I won't read through the 7-minute learning from this, but again, there are links on this slide that will be able to take you to those resources for you to read that review in more detail. But in summary, HN was a child who was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when he was 11 years old. He moved into a Herefordshire refuge with his mum and siblings from Worcestershire, where he was subject to a child in need plan. The trigger for the review was as a result, child HN was taken to hospital in an ambulance due to concerns within diabetic ketoacidosis, and that was due to the mismanagement of his type 1 diabetes. He ended up in ITU as in critical care. Following this episode where he did recover, the review looked at how professionals work with adolescents and their families to ensure effective management of long-term chronic health conditions. The key learning themes identified within the review was the management of type 1 diabetes, cross-border working, understanding the adolescent's world effectively with their family and working together, and understanding medical neglect, and ensuring that the parent has a clear understanding of the child's medical needs and there's still responsibility for overseeing that management, whilst also supporting and encouraging that young person to become more independent and take more ownership over their health needs. Next slide. Any child with a complex health condition requires their parent to maintain responsibility in helping them to understand this health condition and manage any of the complex health programs that come through this. This can include providing or overseeing the young person's essential medication administration or taking their child to regular follow-up appointments to ensure that that child and young person has the best quality care. The review highlighted that where there were concerns regarding the lack of engagement with services, this was likely to impact on the child's serious medical condition. When we have concerns like this, children's services should be consulted to determine whether the threshold has been met for medical neglect. It's essential to understand whether there are unintentional errors with condition management versus medical neglect. And that's very much down to ensuring that we're communicating with adolescents and their families to ensure they fully understand what their health condition is and the impact of non-compliance of that. The neglect tools, which we'll talk about later, have been assisted to assist practitioners in their understanding of how children live on a day-to-day basis and how their needs are being met by their parents. And this will provide a consistent approach to determining that child's needs, any risks and circumstances that might be impacting on their health needs. The Voice of the Child's tools that we have will help practitioners work with young people to gauge their understanding of their health needs and also capture the level of support that they're being provided with by their parents and caregivers. Next slide, please. We're moving on to nutritional neglect in adolescence. And this occurs where a parent fails to adequately provide the right nourishment for a child to support normal growth and development. There have been recent cases in the media where parents have been found criminally guilty of child neglect because they failed to ensure that their child ate well, resulting in the significant impact of their child's weight and health. In adolescence, whilst physically the adolescent is able to forage for food, the absence of healthy and nutritious food supplied, combined with limited experience of preparation and how to make their own meals, and the lack of insight into nutritional needs, can lead to the adolescent going towards a more convenience food type diet, or possibly not eating, or it may be the introduction of some restricted eatings due to pressures of society. Foods that are high with saturated, I apologise for my voice. Foods high in saturated fats are more likely to find their way. I'm going to just have a drink of water to clear my throat. They're more likely to find their way into the diet of a neglected adolescent who is less likely to eat fruit, vegetables, and nutritious food. There are both short and long-term outcomes for young people whose diet is inadequate. Poor nutritional status is likely to have a detrimental influence on both our cognitive and behavioural adaptation. We're also aware that young people who are reliant on free school meals have the knowledge of going into long school holidays where they're likely to suffer with holiday hunger. And we need to be aware of those young people and what support can be provided, especially during periods like the summer holidays. Adolescence is also a time where restricted or disordered eating may develop, and it requires the need of the parent to still remain that oversight and interest in what is happening with their child to actually identify some concerns that are being raised. And if there is issues with that, the parent does need to continue to oversee and see what the young person is eating and their compliance with any plans that are put in place, but also to support them to get the right support they need from health professionals. Next slide, please. So the neglect and supervision in safety in adolescence. And this is quite a big area when we think about online safety, as well as safety out in the community. So the neglect of this involves a failure to provide an adequate level of guidance and supervision to ensure that a child is physically safe and protected by harm. In adolescence, there's much evidence that inadequate supervision and monitoring of adolescents is associated with adverse behaviour patterns. But the problem is that there's no common understanding of what constitutes supervisory neglect in this age group. And it is made difficult because it is a stage of independence of young people going out, spending more time in their community and with their friends, the introduction of gaming, online activities, having a mobile phone, having access to social media. And it's about that balance with parents of still ensuring there is an appropriate level of supervision and oversight as to what their child and young person is doing. Without that, there is more opportunities for that young person to be involved in risk-taking activities, and there's increased vulnerability and further exposure to contextual safeguarding risks. Neglect of online activity can and does cause many problems for adolescents. And we know that there's risks of young people being groomed and exploited online or being radicalised into extremist views. Next slide, please. So the NSPCC has recently been doing some research around adolescent neglect. And what they found was that 1 in 10 adolescents in the UK report experiences of neglect. Neglect does remain the most common category for child abuse and for children on child protection plans in 2024. And that's accounting for around half the cases. So half the children in England that are on child protection plans are on for neglect. And this is a new piece of information that's come through, is that children aged 16 and 17 made up the second largest age group of reported serious incident notifications and rapid reviews in 2024. So the age group of the children that are deemed most vulnerable are babies, and now it's been the second most vulnerable age group is 16 and 17-year-olds. And within Herefordshire, 45% of children on child protection plans for neglect are adolescents. There can sometimes be an assumption that adolescents have a natural resilience to poor parenting experience. There was a study that was completed, the troubled teens, Vicky's already covered this, that's been reported already. So we just need to be aware that this age group of young people is highly vulnerable. Okay, next slide, please. We're going to be looking at cumulative harm, which is the impact of harmful events or patterns of harm that build up over time. And this can include abuse, neglect, and other adverse circumstances. This harm can be physical, sexual, emotional, psychological, or result from accidental trauma and broader events like the recent pandemic or war. It's important to consider both the harm and any safety factors that reduce or mitigate its impact. Safety can come from parents, carers, or the wider network stepping in to protect the young person or adolescent. What we need to do is identify cumulative harm. So when a child or young person becomes known to you, take an opportunity to review their records, consult with other professionals that already know this young person. Especially if the family has moved from a different area, we need to take the time to understand what's happened to this young person, this adolescent, in their earlier childhood that may be having an impact on how they're presenting today. Using chronologies, multi-agency, to find out from other agencies what's happening with that child and if we can see any patterns of trauma or harm that have happened previously, as well as positive experience of what has worked well for that child. We need to focus on the whole childhood, not just the presenting issue. And we need to balance harm with strengths and safety. Explore the strengths and safety factors that mitigate harm from the perspective of the child and their family. Identify who in that child's life provides care and safety and what they do to help. Remember that safety is not just a one-off event, it must be sustained over time to make a real difference. Assess both when the child is at risk and when they've been harmed, considering the seriousness and the evidence. Listen to what that child is saying about their experience, but also observe their behaviours. Children and young people don't always tell us what's going on, but sometimes they might do that through their body language or how they're behaving. We need to avoid victim-blaming language and recognise that trauma is often more severe when caused by trusted carers. And we need to be aware of the long-term impacts of cumulative harm, sometimes surfacing later in life, sometimes during adolescence. That repeated harm can erode trust and relationships. So what can we do to address cumulative harm? We need to contribute to and use multi-agency chronologies that include both harmful and positive experience. Ensure that we have regular and meaningful engagement with adolescents and monitor their progress. Use plain, respectful and non-blaming language. And we need to be trauma informed. We focus on the healing and the repairing of relationships, not just immediate safety. And encourage everybody around that young person to help enrich their sense of self-worth. Next slide. I think at this point we're moving on to a video that it sort of encompasses childhood trauma and the impact that this can have during the adolescent period.
Brain development is much more than a story about biology. From the earliest years, relationships with others play a key role in shaping how our brain grows and develops. Early relationships, where there is abuse and neglect, have a long-term impact on children. A brain that has adapted to survive in a threatening or unpredictable world may not work so well in an ordinary environment. This can create what is called latent vulnerability, where early abusive or neglectful experiences with carers put children at greater risk of experiencing mental health problems in the future. For these children, compared to their peers, common experiences like moving to a new school can feel more daunting and stressful. New faces can appear threatening, while positive social cues can be missed. It can be harder to negotiate new social situations and learn to trust new people. Even fun experiences like joining a new sports team can be challenging. Too much focus on potential threat cues can mean missing out on positive social cues such as a playful nudge. Or it causes an overreaction, which leads to an increased risk of conflict and sometimes violence. These reactions can increase the likelihood of generating new stressful events. It's harder to deal with everyday challenges when you feel unconfident and anxious inside, and harder to build and maintain relationships. Over time, this can mean a child loses friends and the support of adults, and so misses out on opportunities to grow and develop. This social thinning can increase the risk of mental health problems in the future. Neuroscience research is beginning to shed new light on how vulnerability unfolds over a child's life. All children need care and stimulation from adults who value them and who show them attention and love. These experiences shape a child's brain development. When children face traumatic experiences like abuse and neglect, their brain adapts to help them cope. We know of changes in 3 different brain systems: the reward, memory, and threat systems. Experiences of domestic violence or physical abuse can lead to hypervigilance, where the brain reacts more to threat. This might help a child stay safe in an early adverse environment, but it can cause problems in more ordinary environments. Hypervigilance can best be understood as a pattern of adaptation, rather than a sign of damage. Abuse and neglect can also mean a world where a child's basic needs for care and attention are not met. This can shape the brain's reward system, the part of the brain that helps us learn about positive aspects of our environment and motivates our behaviour. Over time, the brain's reward system can learn to respond differently to things like positive social cues. Neuroscience studies have also pointed to changes in the autobiographical memory system, our memory of everyday past experiences. Following trauma, negative memories appear to become more salient, which means they become more prominent than positive ones. And everyday memories can also become less detailed. This is a problem because we need to draw on past experiences to help us deal with new social situations. Neuroscience research is showing how childhood trauma can create latent vulnerability, increasing the risk of later mental health problems like anxiety and depression. This vulnerability is not just located in the child, but arises through their relationships. Helping children who have experienced trauma still requires ordinary boundaries and consequences, but it also requires us to step back and reflect and see behaviour that we find challenging in a different light. A child may simply be doing their best to survive now, with brain adaptations from the past. We know a child's brain has the capacity to continue to adapt. For this to happen, they need our help to build and maintain trusted relationships, manage everyday stresses, and prevent new ones from happening. We need to encourage them to try again and believe things can be different. This is far from an easy task and takes time. Science is helping reframe our understanding of childhood trauma. Seeing children's behaviour in a new light can mean we respond differently. But there is much still to learn. Working together, we can develop more effective approaches that promote resilience and recovery. We can help children build trusting relationships and create opportunities for their brains to adapt in new ways.
Thanks, Kirsty. There we go. If we move on to the next slide. So we're going to think about adolescence changes to the brain. So adolescence is a sensitive period for brain development. The prefrontal cortex, which governs decision-making, impulse control and planning, is among the last of the regions to mature, and often it isn't fully developed until the mid-20s. And this explains why adolescents may struggle with judgment and risk assessments. There are also hormonal influences. So sex hormone development, the drive for physical changes impact the emotional regulation and risk-taking behaviours. Testosterone can influence the limbic system development, while estrogen supports maturation of cognitive and emotional circuits. Stress hormones can be elevated due to chronic stress or neglect, and that can impact the development and memory development. Adolescence is also a stage of identity formation. Young people explore their roles, their values and their beliefs, asking who I am, who do I want to be? And that increased cognitive capacity allows for abstract thinking and self-reflection. but also heightens self-consciousness and sensitivity to peer comparison. The independence from their parents grows, yet supportive relationships remain crucial for healthy development. There's also a period of emotional distance where the adolescent pulls away from the parent to establish their own autonomy, spending more time with peers. This can create an emotional distance and sometimes can be misinterpreted as rejection by the parent. Conflict may arise around control over daily decisions, curfews, appearance, friendships, education, reflecting the adolescent's need for autonomy. Despite distancing, parental monitoring and open communication remains protective factors against these risky behaviours. And there's also a period of time of modern pressures. There's social media and online cultures that can amplify peer influence and comparison, increasing a young person's stress and anxiety. Academic expectations, body image concerns, and exposure to unrealistic standards contribute to further mental health challenges. And the NSPCC emphasises that these pressures, combined with hormonal and neurological changes, can heighten vulnerability to exploitation and risky behaviours. Next slide, please. So the impact of neglect and recognising it in adolescence. So neglect during adolescence is strongly linked to mental health problems such as depression, anxiety, and low self-esteem. Young people often feel unloved and unsupported, and this can lead to internalising behaviours such as withdrawing and suicidal thoughts, and externalising behaviours, aggression and substance misuse. The increased vulnerability through neglected adolescence, they're more likely to be groomed or exploited, engaging in risk-taking behaviours or becoming involved in criminal activity. A lack of parental monitoring and emotional support increases susceptibility to peer pressure, gang involvement, and harmful relationships. Neglect often results in poor school attendance, low attainment, and disengagement from education. Adolescents may refuse to go to school due to emotional distress or a lack of encouragement at home, which compounds the feelings of failure and isolation. Neglected young people frequently experience difficulty forming healthy relationships. They may feel socially isolated and might struggle with their own identity and independence. Emotional neglect undermines confidence and social competence, leading to peer rejection or again associating with risky groups. The physical neglect can lead to their poor hygiene, inadequate nutrition, or untreated medical conditions, which will also affect their health and self-esteem. They may also engage in behaviours that jeopardise their physical health, such as substance misuse or unsafe sexual activity. Neglect in teenagers is frequently missed because their behaviours such as withdrawal, aggression or risk taken are interpreted as typical teenage behaviour rather than indicators of harm. The signs might be subtle. In older children, they might be able to hide the neglect or spend more time away from home, making it harder to notice. They may appear independent but still require a significant amount of parental care and guidance. Professionals sometimes focus on managing the challenging behaviours, for example, truancy or substance misuse, instead of exploring the underlying cause, which could be neglect. And this can lead to missed opportunities for interventions. Adolescents may also resist help or present as coping well, which might mask their vulnerability. There's common misconception that teenagers are more resilient to neglect than younger children, and research shows us that the impact of this maltreatment does not diminish with age. In adolescence, neglect can cause serious harm, including mental health issues, exploitation, and offending behaviour. Next slide, please. So we're moving now on to the new thresholds document for Herefordshire and Worcestershire. On this slide, there is a link to the new guidance. So I would encourage all practitioners here to have a look at the new threshold documents. We're still using the same levels of need as before, 1, 2, 3, 4. But what we need to consider is that when we've got a young person where we've got concerns around neglect that may be sitting at level 2, level 3, that we're considering using early help, and then potentially at level 4, a referral into children's services that is requiring more specialist intervention. As with the previous threshold document, at the end, there is an appendices that gives you some indicators as to where the child's needs sit. So, for example, level 2 could be poor personal hygiene. Level 4, poor hygiene is persistent and chronic, having a significant impact on the child's social experiences and health despite advice and support at level 3. Next slide, please. So on this slide is just links to all the different resources that we have within Herefordshire to support you as practitioners, identifying and working with families where there's concerns around neglect. There's also the links to all the different training courses that are on offer. As Vicky said before, there's neglect training courses, GCP2, links to the other training and events. You could sign up for the fortnightly partnership bulletin. And as well as there's the neglect screening tools and the day in the life tools. Next slide, please. I'm aware we are short on time. So I just want to talk about the graded care profile too. So this is, as Vicky said before, the research-based neglect assessment tool that we use within Herefordshire. As Vicky said previously, audits that we've completed are showing that this is not being used as effectively as it could be. It is a really good tool that is there to identify what needs a young person is having met for them and which aren't. And it does break itself down into age groups, which means we can focus on adolescents during this time. Next slide, please. So I recently attended an event by the NSPCC where they were looking at how the graded care profile can be used with adolescents, as it's often a time where practitioners struggle. So examples were given where a young person who was not attending education and there were no concerns around neglect, although the tool was then used and it was used to explore what might be impacting on his school refusal. And this resulted in a really rounded view of this young person's life and helped capture his voice and understand what was happening. The GCP2 has also been used with young people who have been placed into care to help explore their own childhoods and what they experienced. Practitioners and the young people found this was a useful exercise to allow the young person to better understand why they were in care and what care they were entitled to from caregivers. When it comes to adolescence, the application of the graded care profile can be slightly different. We need to consider that during sort of developmental needs change, adolescents require more autonomy, emotional support and guidance rather than constant physical care. The indicators of neglect shift. Issues like lack of emotional availability, poor supervision, or failure to support education and social development become more prominent. The views and experiences should be central to the assessment as they can articulate the needs better than younger children. And neglect in adolescence can manifest in risk-taking, mental health struggles, or disengagement from school. So engaging and listening to the voice and the lived experience of the young person is essential when completing the graded care profile too. Next slide, please. So these are just some ways where you can be using the tool to have those conversations with young people and actually gauging their voice. And actually you could get the young person to complete the graded care profile with you, asking them who's supporting them to meet their mental health needs, who is supporting them with their medical needs, who supports them, make sure that they eat day, who cares about them going to school, who's supporting them with their education, what's their relationship like with their parents, who's championing them. Next slide, please. So just moving on to recommendations for practice. So it's really essential that we complete assessments. We need to understand the meaning behind a young person's behaviour and the impact of care being received from a caregiver. We need to think about the sustainability of change. All plans and meetings need to consider and make reference to the young person and what their lived experience is. We need to strengthen, monitor and implement plans that are smart and address the needs of the child. And we need to effective management oversight, especially where consent is withdrawn from the family or the young person. On this slide, there is also the link to the QR code, which is where you can provide feedback around today's training. Next slide, please. And just a final note, even as kids reach adolescence, they need more than ever for us to watch over them. Adolescence is not about letting go, it's about hanging on during a very bumpy ride. Thank you, everybody. Have you got any questions?